What if England wasn't born from ambition, vision, or destiny, but from fear? What if the English nation emerged not because its people planned to unite, but because they had no other choice? When Viking ships first appeared on the horizon, no one thought they were watching the beginning of England. They thought they were watching the end of their world. Yet from that chaos, through invasion, adaptation, and survival, something entirely new took shape. This is the video of how Viking pressure didn't just scar Britain, but quietly forced it to become a nation. Britain after Rome, an island without a center. When Roman authority collapsed in Britain in the early 5th century, it left behind roads, ruins, and a political vacuum. The empire that had once connected Britain to the Mediterranean world withdrew its legions, and with them went centralized administration, taxation, and imperial protection. What followed was not instant collapse, but gradual fragmentation. Power became local, authority personal, and survival dependent on regional strength. Communities that had once relied on imperial systems now had to defend, feed, and govern themselves with little more than tradition and force. Over the following centuries, Germanic-speaking groups, later called the Anglo-Saxons, established dominance across much of lowland Britain. Their societies formed kingdoms that rose and fell with remarkable speed, shaped by warfare, marriage alliances, and shifting loyalties. Northumbria dominated the north for a time. Mercia expanded aggressively across the Midlands. Wessex clung to the south and west, often overshadowed by larger rivals, but stubbornly resilient. These kingdoms shared language and culture, but they did not share loyalty. There was no England yet, only competing rulers, fragile borders, and an island accustomed to internal conflict. No kingdom could assume permanent dominance. That internal division would soon prove dangerously inadequate when a new kind of enemy appeared. The first Viking raids, shock without collapse. The earliest Viking raids in Britain were terrifying but limited. Longships appeared suddenly along the coast, their sails cutting through the mist, targeting monasteries and undefended settlements. Raiders struck fast, seized portable wealth, and vanished back into the sea before local forces could respond. To contemporaries, these attacks felt like divine punishment, violent, inexplicable, and unstoppable. Yet at first they did not fundamentally alter Britain's political structure. Kings still ruled their territories. Rivalries continued. The Vikings were dangerous, but they were still viewed as an external nuisance rather than a force capable of reshaping the entire island. What changed everything was not the violence itself, but the shift in Viking behavior. By the mid-9th century, Scandinavian forces were no longer content to raid and retreat with the seasons. They began staying through the winter, establishing camps and supply networks. Families, craftsmen, and traders followed warriors ashore, signaling intentions that went far beyond looting. Once Vikings stopped leaving, Britain stopped being able to ignore them. The Great Heathen Army, when raiding became conquest. In 865, Britain faced a threat unlike anything before it. A massive Viking force, later known as the Great Heathen Army, landed in East Anglia with clear intent. This was not a single warband seeking quick wealth. It was a coalition of leaders and followers, large enough to move like a political entity rather than a temporary raiding party. Over the next decade, Anglo-Saxon kingdoms collapsed one by one. Northumbria fell first, weakened by internal strife and unable to mount unified resistance. East Anglia followed, its king killed and authority dismantled. Mercia fractured under sustained pressure, its power reduced and reshaped by Viking dominance. Kings were killed, replaced, or forced into submission. Modern archaeology has increasingly reinforced this picture. Camps associated with the Great Army reveal long-term occupation, trade activity, and economic integration. This was an invading system, not a passing storm. Britain was no longer facing raids. It was facing replacement. By the late 870s, nearly every major Anglo-Saxon kingdom had fallen or been fundamentally altered. Only one major kingdom remained unconquered. Wessex on the brink and the rise of Alfred Wessex survived not because it was strongest, but because it adapted fastest. Under King Alfred, the kingdom came dangerously close to destruction. Viking forces pushed deep into Wessex territory, and at one point Alfred was forced into hiding, reduced to a fugitive in his own land. Then came the reversal. In 878, Alfred rallied his forces and met the Vikings at the Battle of Edington. The victory did not eliminate the Viking threat, but it saved Wessex from collapse. More importantly, it reshaped Alfred's thinking. He understood that surviving the next wave would require more than courage. Alfred's genius was not that he won a battle, it was that he prepared for the next war before it began. The burst system, turning the landscape into a weapon. After Edington, Alfred initiated one of the most significant defensive reforms in early medieval Europe. Across Wessex, fortified settlements known as burhs were constructed or strengthened. These were not isolated castles, but a coordinated network designed so that no community lay far from protection. Defense was now planned at the scale of an entire kingdom rather than improvised town by town. The burhs denied Vikings easy access to land, limited their mobility, and forced them into predictable routes where they could be confronted. They also doubled as economic hubs, allowing trade and administration to continue even during conflict. War no longer froze society, it was absorbed into governance. This was no longer reactive defense, it was strategic geography. Alfred had turned terrain itself into an ally. Alfred also accepted a hard truth. Vikings were not leaving. Treaties acknowledged zones of Viking control, later known as the Danelaw. This recognition stabilized borders and bought time. Alfred had turned survival into sustainability. And crucially, he built a system that his successors could expand. His reforms were designed for generations. Edward the Elder and Ethelfled, the slow reconquest. When Alfred died, the real test of his reforms began. His son, Edward the Elder, inherited not just a throne but a strategy. Working closely with his sister, Ethelfled, ruler of Mercia, Edward continued the methodical expansion of fortified control into Viking-held regions. Ethelfled was not a symbolic figurehead. Contemporary records credit her with leading campaigns, organizing defenses, and reclaiming major towns. Under her leadership, Viking strongholds such as Derby and Leicester fell back into English control. This phase of conflict was not dramatic conquest, it was systematic erosion. Burh by burh, treaty by treaty, Viking power south of the Humber weakened. English authority expanded not through sudden victory, but through relentless pressure. What emerged was something new. Coordinated rule across former kingdoms. Mercia and Wessex no longer competed. They cooperated. Aethelstan in Brunanburh, England, asserts itself. By the time Aethelstan came to power, the political groundwork had been laid. In 927, he effectively united the remaining English territories under a single crown. Unity was no longer just aspiration, it was policy, but unity declared is not unity secured. In 937, a powerful coalition formed against him. Viking rulers from Dublin joined forces with the kings of Scotland and Strathclyde. Their goal was simple: shatter the emerging English kingdom before it became permanent. The clash at Brunanburh was devastating. Aethelstan's victory was decisive. Contemporary poetry celebrates it as a defining triumph, not just of a king, but of a people. After Brunanburh, England was no longer an idea struggling to survive. It was a political reality capable of defending itself against united opposition. How Viking pressure created England. The Vikings did not intend to create England, they intended to exploit it. But their presence exposed the weakness of fragmented rule and forced transformation. Military systems became national. Administration scaled up. Borders hardened into political identities. Cultural interaction reshaped language, law, and economy. Crisis accelerated evolution. The pressure never allowed England to relax. Every reform answered a threat. Every institution emerged from necessity. England was not born in peace. It was forged under sustained stress. Stability came only after adaptation. Without the Vikings, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms might have continued competing indefinitely. With them, survival demanded unity. Fragmentation became a luxury no longer affordable. History's sharpest irony. The Vikings came to conquer, to settle, and to dominate. They burned monasteries, broke kingdoms, and redrew the map of Britain. Yet in doing so, they forced something unexpected into existence. Destruction became the catalyst for creation. A unified England, built not by grand vision, but by adaptation, not by choice, but by pressure. Not in spite of invasion, but because of it, a nation shaped by necessity rather than design. History rarely follows the plan of those who swing the axe. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden forces that shaped England, make sure to like and subscribe for more cinematic history stories, because the past is never as simple as it looks, and there's always more beneath the surface.